David is a well-known writer on the this, if you like, between 19th century archaeology, heritage and politics, 20th century as well, and biographical interpretations of the various different figures involved in such endeavors. And he has worked in many different universities and institutions during the course of his distinguished career, and we're very privileged that he's able to speak with us this evening. You can find more details about his background and, of course, on the flyer, and which is available on our website. So I think what we need to do now is to welcome him and say how much we're looking forward to this talk. Really an absolutely fascinating subject. So thank you very much indeed. The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for the invitation. Let me just get my somewhere. Woo, where's it gone? There we go. Right. Well, Winifred Lamb is remembered as one of the pioneering geologists in Turkey during the 1930s. And during the Second World War, she worked for the Turkish language section of the BBC, and after the end of the hostilities, helped to establish what is now the British Institute at Ankara, and served as the honorary secretary into the late 1950s. She was born in November 1894 at Holly Lodge, Camden Hill, the former home of Lord Macaulay. And her father, Edmund, was a colliery owner and racehorse trainer, and her mother, Mabel, was from the Winkworth family of Manchester cotton mill owners. She was educated at home before being admitted to Newnham College, Cambridge in 1913 to read classics. And one of her contemporaries was the future Cambridge Disney Professor of Archaeology, Dorothy Garrard. Winifred was influenced at Cambridge by Jane Harrison and A.B. Cook, but unlike her male contemporaries, her interest in prehistory was not fostered by Sir William Ridgway, as he banned her from his lectures, not because she was a woman, as has sometimes been suggested, but because she was a member of the Union for Democratic Control. As the daughter of an MP, Winifred was invited to join Room 40 at the Admiralty. This is a shot of the Admiralty at the start of the 20th century. And it was there that she joined a group of talented individuals who were working on deciphering German naval codes in the final years of the First World War. Among her contemporaries were the Knox brothers, as well as the future Lincoln Professor of Classical Archaeology, Sir John Beazley. Indeed, Winifred's diaries reveal that in spite of operational duties, she frequently joined Beazley in attending sales, and they jointly presented an Attic black figure at Amphresh Museum in Oxford that they purchased together. So on the screen, the one on the right is with the Minotaur, is the pot that in the middle of deciphering codes she went and bought, and the one on the other side was something she bought for herself at the same sale. It was at one of these wartime sales that Winifred was introduced to Sir Sidney Cockrell, director of the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, and she was invited to work in a voluntary capacity on the labels for an antiquities gallery. This in turn led to the invitation issued after the end of the war to be honorary keeper of Greek antiquities at the Fitzwilliam, an unpaid post that she held for nearly 40 years. Before I discuss Winifred's connections with Anatolia, I'd like to mention her sources. She kept a regular diary that was particularly detailed right up until the 1990s, and then her diary became more appointment orientated. And this is just a view of, you can see sort of Monday the 13th, or actually Sunday the 12th, Monday the 13th, and so on, a dining room party on the left screen. It says jolly dinner party, and then she's given the seating with people like Wade Geary, W.L. Winifred Lamb, and so on. There's a mention of Sir Arthur Evans there. So these are very, very detailed. These diaries were retained by her family, and I'm very grateful to her relation and goddaughter, Rosemary Addington, for letting me have access to them. Winifred wrote full letters home, and these were used for a draft manuscript for an unpublished biography that was prepared soon after her death in the early 1960s. One copy is in the archive of the British School at Athens. She was a keen photographer. Of her albums are now in Athens, although those relating to her work in Anatolia were retained by the late Rachel Maxwell Hislop. Winifred also wrote short stories, and one of these, The Government Inspector, was set on her excavation at Kasura. Apart from typed and often unpublished reports on travels, such as her preliminary journey to Western Anatolia in the mid-1930s, Winifred authored a number of books, journal articles, as well as an extensive list of academic reviews. Other sources include the reports on archaeological trips published by her friend May Herford in the Manchester Guardian, as well as excavation reports in the Times and other newspapers. I'll return to the BBC archives later in the lecture. Winifred's first visit to Anatolia was in the autumn of 1923. At this point, she was honorary keeper of degrees at the Fitz, and she'd been admitted as a student of the British School at Athens in the autumn of 1920, along with a group of other women. And here's a photograph of Winifred in the centre with May Herford and Lillian Chandler either side. And then this was a drawing that she sent home based on an Athenian pot, but just notice things like the frieze of tennis rackets above, and just the procession and the housekeeper on the right side of the screen who's counting everyone in. So there's a very distinguished group, including, as you can see, the Vice Consul at the British Legation. She was invited by the BSA's director, Alan Wace, to take part in the excavations at Mycenae, co-directed by Carl Blagan, director of the American School. And this is actually part of the palace that she excavated. And here's one of her drawings and the frescoes that formed part of her study. The inclusion of women in an excavation was a great change in British practice. J.P. Droop's newly published Cambridge University Press Handbook of Archaeological Excavations, 1915, drew attention to the perceived difficulties of allowing women to join a dig. Herford was amused by Droop's seventh, named after the concluding chapter, which was seen as a high-spirited and energetic, even if well-mannered attack on the presence of women, or rather ladies, at a dig. Droop's discomfort appears to have been prompted by the presence of Dorothy Lamb, another classicist, but no relation of Winifred, with whom he'd worked on the British School excavation at Philakopie on Milos. Winifred then developed a strong interest in prehistory, and in the spring of 1921, she went to Crete, where the photograph is taken, to study the murals uncovered in the Bronze Age palaces. And this was reflected in Cambridge by the creation of a prehistoric gallery at the Fitzwilliam that included prehistoric material collected by Cambridge graduates during their travels in Greece and Anatolia in the years before the First World War. In 1923, Winifred wished to visit archaeological collections in Istanbul as part of her research on Aegean prehistory. Her route took her via Izmir, recently the focus of conflict in the war between Greece and Turkey. And this conflict had formed the background to her time in Greece. And while in Athens, she'd got to know Arnold Toynbee, who was covering the war for the Manchester Guardian. Her record of the trip to Izmir is brief, but she mentioned crossing the minefield under the naval escort that guarded the approaches to the port. She actually had a photograph in her album of the mines. And she took a carriage and drove through the bazaar, Turkish quarter, and the ruins. From Izmir, the ship headed at speed for the Dardanelles, as it needed to traverse the Narrows before the nighttime curfew on shipping. And again, Winifred recorded the journey. To the right, Troy, the coast very low, behind, flat. And as they passed the site of the Gallipoli campaign, she recorded, we turned into the Dardanelles and saw the River Clyde, that's the ship here, and the various landing places. The Dardanelles on the left, Troy on the right, with two different associations, rather impressive. At Istanbul, she took a journey up the Bosporus and spent some time in the museum before returning to England by train to attend Wacer's lecture on Mycenae at the end of October. The Mycenae excavations were completed in the spring of 1923, and the British School turned to the renewed work at Sparta from the spring of 1924. And this is a caricature of Winifred that was drawn during the Sparta excavations. Winifred was responsible for the study of archaic bronzes, as she was completing a book on Greek and Roman bronzes for Methuen that would appear in 1929. Winifred found the arrangements at Sparta unsatisfactory and indicated that she was going to leave, but Arthur Woodward, the director, assigned her to a new area of excavation. This was a turning point, and she confided to her mother in a letter home. I've learned enough to run a dig of my own. In fact, many sorts of digs, including the kinds not illustrated at Mycenae, and I've enjoyed unearthing archaic objects of great charm and beauty. It was at this time that Walter Hurtley, the assistant director, was resuming British excavations. Hurtley had served on the Salonika front in the First World War and had taken an active interest in the archaeological remains that had been found. The Allied forces had created a small archaeological museum in the White Tower to protect the discoveries. In March 1925, Winifred joined Hurtley in the excavation of the mound at Vardarovca, some 35 kilometers northwest of Thessaloniki. You can see that on the map number 4. The accommodation was basic, and Winifred confided, I'm older in bed than I have often been at Cambridge, less so in fact, because I take off very little and put on lots more. Winifred started to search for her own site to excavate and started to survey northwestern Greece in the vicinity of Thermon in 1927, and then Aetolia and Epirus in 1928. The Macedonian work had made her think about connections between the Balkans and Anatolia. In the spring of 1928, she visited the island of Lesvos, and that autumn excavated at Methymna on the north coast. And here's one of the bits of Roman pottery that she acquired for the Fitzwilliam. The results were disappointing, and in November that same year, she continued to look for a prehistoric site with Richard Hutchinson. They spotted prehistoric pottery at the site of Thermi. You can see that on the sort of east coast, halfway down the east of the island. She writes, then the weather broke. Next day, torrents of rain. We took the post bus to a place called Thermi, the last possible place, where there was a river, a great bay, and other things associated with prehistoric settlements. The rain was clearing when we got out of the car. and we looked at the coast, and I said, "It does rather look like a little mound. Perhaps it's natural." And Hutchinson said, "It isn't much smaller than Mully." So we went to the place indicated. It was the edge of the sea, and we walked to the water's edge because there was a section cut by the sea. Yes, a few potsherds. Indefinite. It must have been inhabited. And she goes on. The formal excavations were started in April 1929 and continued through to 1933. Her excavation team included 2 women, Nina Six from Amsterdam and Gill from Newnham, who was in charge of making the plans of the site. One of the men, William Cuttle, had excavated with Winifred at Sparta and also in Macedonia. And Lesvos at this time was faced with overcrowding from refugees who'd fled from Anatolia. Winifred employed many of them as part of her workforce to clear the site. And here are just some of the finds, this from the Illustrated London News. And then Winifred herself surveying at Thermi. She wanted to place her Thermi material in a regional context, and she was particularly keen on some pottery from Schliemann's excavation in the Troad that was now stored in Berlin. Her chronological structure for Thermi was directly linked to that adopted for the stratigraphy at Troy. For example, Troy 2A coincided with Thermi 4 and 5. And in October 1929, she visited the Troad specifically to study the relations between Troy and prehistoric Mytilene. In 1921, she presented a paper on the links between Lesvos and the Troad to the meeting of the Classical Association. And the following year, Blagan renewed the excavations at Troy, and these photographs are taken from that dig. In May 1932, Winifred visited these excavations. She was particularly critical of his working pattern. They take 1.5 hours over lunch and work at low pressure for 10 hours a day, which I think a bad plan. She stayed with the daughter and son-in-law of Frank Calvert at Çanakkale, and then took a tour of the mounds of the Triad in a car driven by a marvellous Turkish chauffeur called Ramsey. He was a Scottish actor and speaks English and Turkish, teaches me Turkish en route, and I'm getting much better. We drove for 11 hours with an hour stop at midday and some other stops to look at mounds, over heath and scrub, up and down ditches, through rivers. We are all in love with Turkey, and we like the Turks. From the Triad, Winifred visited Ankara at the prompting of John Myers, the Wickham Professor of Ancient History at Oxford. She is particularly keen to see the prehistoric collections housed there, as she was due to give a paper at the first International Congress of Prehistoric and Proto-Historics in July that year. Her passion for Turkey was clear, and in January 1933, she started to learn Turkish in earnest. There's a possibility that she'd been planning to excavate at Cyzicus that had been explored by members of the British School before the First World War. By 1934, Anatolia was the focus of her interests. And she wrote in quite a detailed way about the work of Kurt Bittel. In Anatolia, one might find links between the north and south, west and east. Archaeologists occasionally claim to have done so, nor is it possible to specialize on Minoan or Bulgarian antiquities, or those of the regions between, without being compelled sooner or later to define their relations to some part of Asia Minor. Gordon Child, the Abercrombie Professor of Archaeology at Edinburgh, reviewed Winifred's work at Thermi and specifically made the point that her excavations were important not only for the European Bronze Age, but also the interpretation of North Anatolia. Winifred did not surprisingly turn to Anatolia for her next project, and in 1934 excavated at the sanctuary of Apollo Phanios on the island of Chios. And this is just the plan of what she found there. But in 1935, a civil war broke out and Chios was seized, blocking any further archaeological work for the immediate future. As a result, she planned a journey through West Anatolia to look for a new site. Her itinerary is described in an unpublished account, Adventures in Anatolia. She started in Izmir and took the train to Eskişehir. She described her lodgings. The hotel is shabby and expensive, but by paying well, I have got a clean room with a wash-hand basin and a nice view. She described the plan of action. This afternoon, the guide turned up, or rather inspector, a useful little man with nice manners and most helpful at arranging the journeys. After tomorrow, we drive, carriage, to a village with a mound and then take the night train to Kütahya. He knows all the ropes. We would have started tomorrow, but I want more money and my bank is shut as today is Sunday. Suleiman Hamid is the little man's name. He's sympathetic and has a twinkle in his eye, knows Professor Calder and the butlers, Turkish only, and I'm getting on. She wrote to her mother from Kütahya, I'm having a marvellous journey after my own heart. It's as informal as it used to be when I was there first. Also, the country is bristling with mounds. And then at Avion, she wrote, I'm so happy. Turkey is the land of my dreams. I must underlined, transfer all my activities here. It is vast, unexplored, with all the joys one used to have in Greece before Greece was spoilt. I get on very well with the Turks. It's marvellous to have archaeology of the type I excel in. As a result of these travels, she identified a mound near Kasura for excavation. You can see the red dot in the middle of that site, or the middle of the map. In the autumn of 1935, Winifred and Edna, her contemporary from Newnham, conducted a sondage at Kasura. This resulted in two main excavating seasons in 1936 and 7. She was joined by a small team that included Rachel Play, later Rachel Maxwell Hislop. You can see her on the right screen next to Winifred. And Rachel had been trained through the established Institute of Archaeology. Winifred described the dynamics of the dig. Stuart has got up and is finishing the cemetery, but that doesn't help, where he begged me to engage extra men and start 2 new areas just before he went to bed. Rachel can help supervising now, though there is a lot of indoor work for her to do. Mrs. S does such a lot of Stuart's work that it's a miracle how she manages to catalogue our finds. The site is so exciting. I'd like to finish it this year, but fear this is impossible, though I shall try and get all the evidence available and may take a year off next year, with perhaps a little trip to Greece with Nina. Winifred identified 3 different phases for the site at Kasura and drew particular parallels with Troy 6. The results of the excavation were presented to the Society of Antiquaries in London in February 1937 in a paper, Recent Developments in the Prehistory of Anatolia. And she explored the thesis that there were 2 main groupings in prehistoric Anatolia, one in the west around Troy, the other in central and eastern Anatolia that was linked to the Hittites. And she suggested that Kasura lay on the route that linked central Anatolia to the Aegean cultures. She described the site in a letter to her mother. The dig is being very satisfactory. Having patiently removed surface earth, we now come to the plums. In my area, we've got the loveliest vase I've seen dug up, bright red and bosses, incised ornaments, ornate handles, Nina gave it first aid in situ, bandages and cellulose on the cracks. Then 4 workmen brought string around its waist and triumphantly carried it home. We've got an angelic terracotta ox, small and fat, with a ridge on its back. A more informal view of the excavations was to emerge in Winifred's unpublished short story, The Inspector Appears, which featured the thinly disguised Miss Nancy Wood of Cambridge, Miss Olivia Stone of London University, who perhaps may be persuaded to mend some of the broken vases in our municipal collection, Mr. MacLeod, the architect, John Buchanan of Cambridge, and his wife Lucy. A charming lady, though oddly enough she is not as modern in her outlook as one would expect. Winifred's style betrays the influence of contemporary crime writers such as Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers, who are both known to her personally. The fact that she was able to excavate in Turkey reflects the great social changes in the country. A glimpse of this new role for women in Ataturk's Turkey is provided in the story. Mustafa, the government inspector, observes Sultan, one of the local women working on the excavation. A few feet away, Sultan, the girl who washed the potsherd, squatted in the dry grass, waiting for the next basket, which was due as soon as the workmen should have finished digging the exciting ashy stratum in a neighbouring test pit. Modern progress, said Mustafa to himself, has unfortunately not yet reached our peasant women. But actually it had touched Sultan's feet, which were encased in large men's shoes from Czechoslovakia, whereas her body was still dressed in the traditional Turkish manner, striped trousers, bright jacket, and her hair was very unprogressive indeed, being divided into 16 narrow plaits, artificially lengthened with brown rags. Mustafa even made the claim, "I greatly admire the progressive attitude of England towards feminine education, but Turkey is still more progressive." The results of Winifred's excavations were presented at the Royal Academy of Arts in London in 1936, and she formed a panel at the British Association for the Advancement of Science in their meeting in Cambridge in August 1938, during which Child re-emphasised the links between Hertley's work in Macedonia and Winifred's excavations at Thermi and Kasura. In a major survey of recent archaeological work in Anatolia by John Myers that was published on the eve of war, he noted the work of Blagan, Bittel, and Winifred that placed the whole of prehistory of Anatolia into fresh light and fairly clear perspective. Myers turned 70 in July 1999, and Winifred presented an essay on a group of West Anatolia ceramics in the Fitzwilliam as part of the Festschrift in his honour. These have been derived from 2 Cambridge archaeologists, Alan Wace, who'd acquired them in Izmir in 1908, and Sir William Ridgway, who'd acquired them from the Swedish consul in Izmir in 1909. As war broke out, Winifred helped to pack up the classical collections of the Fitzwilliam that were sent to secure locations in Wales, and her mother's ailing health also demanded attention. She took the opportunity to improve her Turkish skills, and in April 1990 explored the opportunity to work for the BBC. Sir Leonard Woolley has told me that you might like to do some work for the BBC in connection with the Turkish broadcast. We're considering various schemes for the very brief news talks to last about 5 minutes on general cultural and political subjects. Winifred and Woolley had known each other since the early 1920s. However, it is particularly significant that at this point in time, Woolley was working for intelligence in the War Office. Winifred hesitated, partly because of her mother's health, and she became a local Air Raid Precaution Officer in Sussex at the height of the Battle of Britain. Her diaries record the crashed aircraft in the fields around Midhurst. Her mother died in August 1941, and Winifred then joined the Greek language section of the BBC. It was recognised the BBC was a popular station in occupied Greece, and the programme to encourage resistance. However, through the autumn, she had a series of meetings with the Turkish embassy and consulate, and in January 1942, she transferred to the Turkish language section of the BBC. When I approached the BBC, there was little in the archives about her service, essentially just her dates of service. However, in her diaries that I showed you earlier on, there were regular notes about finishing report. And I contacted the BBC archives and said, do these dates make any sense? And they said, those reports. What became very clear was Winifred was writing a monthly submission of intelligence on what was going on in Turkey from monitoring radio broadcasts. It should be remembered that at this time there was a fear that the Axis powers could have been planning a push from the Balkans through Turkey to attack the Middle East, a key source for oil. Anthony Eden used the Turkish language section of the BBC to send a message to Turkey in 1941. In the past few months that have elapsed, many and great events have occurred, but one factor remains constant, and that is Turkey's firm determination to persevere against any aggressor, the greatest treasure which any nation can possess, her independence. Steadfast courage is a traditional quality of the Turkish people, and it's by reason of that courage that Turkey plays, and will continue to play, so important a part in the events of the Near and Middle East. Among Winifred's suggestions to the BBC programme, a weekly review of Westminster parliamentary debates, and a weekly London letter to give a picture of day-to-day life at the centre of the war effort of the United Nations. One of the projects that Winifred was supporting was the creation of a Halkevi in London that opened in February 1942. The poet laureate John Masefield prepared a message for the opening. Wherever Halkevleri have come, they have brought instruction, interest, gladness, companionship, friendship, understanding, and the freeing of many minds from many prejudices. I love to think that the new foundation may make it easy for our two peoples to meet, share thoughts and cultures, and discuss and encourage each other over the problems after the war. In any case, since generous things prosper, it will fulfill the great hope of its founders by teaching the best of our country to know and love what is best in yours. Winifred gave a lecture on archaeology in Anatolia in April 1942. Halkevi hosted a small exhibition of archaeological material from Turkey that was held by the Institute of Archaeology in London. At the BBC, there was monitoring of broadcasts to Turkey that led to a discussion over the merits of the most popular programmes. One of the issues that gave concern was that Turkish listeners tuned in to German stations because they had a better quality music. The BBC's response was to broadcast more Elgar and Vaughan Williams. In the spring of 1944, there was growing concern about Turkey's neutrality in the war. Churchill's May 1944 speech on Turkey in the Foreign Affairs debate in the Commons appears to have drawn on the BBC briefing reports, in other words, what Winifred had prepared. Churchill spoke frankly and regretfully about Turkey's refusal to lend to the Allies the aid which had been sought, though he was hopeful that a still better day would come in relations between that country and the Allies. Winifred's work for the BBC was interrupted when her lodgings in London were hit by an air-launched V-1 rocket in October 1944, and she didn't return to work until April 1945. By then, the focus of her reports were on Russo-Turkish relations. The report even talked about the propaganda broadcasts by the person termed Comrade Haw. Moscow's radio campaign against Turkey has caused widespread indignation, including protests from Ankara press and radio. The most violent broadcasts are those delivered by an announcer called Erdem, who is evidently Turkish by birth, since he's been attacked by the Turkish press under the name of Comrade Haw. Winifred eventually resigned from the BBC in February 1946. In September 1946, John Garstang, who'd worked on the Hittites, brought together a group of people with the aim of forming a British archaeological institute in Turkey. The initial name was, according to the headed notepaper in the BBC archive, the Anglo-Turkish Institute of Archaeology at Ankara. And though this became the British Institute of Archaeology at Ankara, now simply the British Institute. Winifred was appointed honorary secretary in 1948 until she stepped down late 1956. The purpose of the institute was to further British contributions to Anglo-Turkish cooperation in the archaeology of Turkey and kindred subjects such as anthropology, folklore, and ethnology. Winifred was invited by the BBC to make a short programme on the institute and archaeology in Turkey that was broadcast in April 1948. One of her early tasks was to prepare a review of the development of archaeology in Anatolia, especially work conducted by Turkish and German scholars. She was particularly keen to make this work known in the English-speaking world. She was also active in reviewing a series of prehistoric excavations in Anatolia. Now in her 50s, Winifred only made 2 further trips to Turkey. In 1950, she visited Ankara and then various archaeological sites. And then in 1952, she visited Erzurum and Trabzon as part of a project studying 3rd millennium BCE cultures in northeast Anatolia. In addition, she prepared an essay on early Anatolian shrines for the memorial volume of Garstang, who died in 1956. Winifred's last meeting of the British Institute was in November 1958, when the Dvorak treasure was the subject of discussion. In 1959, her created, and in 1963 she suffered a stroke and died near Midhurst in September 1963. She was one of the few women excavating in Turkey during the interwar period. Hetty Goldman at Tarsus would be another example. And her inclusion of women in her teams laid the foundations for a number of post-war careers in archaeology. But a significant part of Winifred's legacy is the continuing work and contribution of the British Institute at Ankara. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that extraordinarily stimulating survey of somebody whose life touches upon some of the most important events of the 20th century in Turkey. I mean, that's, I think, the first point to note. Really, she was able to put herself right at the heart of the action for decade after decade after decade after decade. She must be a remarkable woman. Just while people are thinking of their questions, do you have some sense of her personality that you can give us? And as you're thinking of your questions, do put your hand up, and we can know that you'd like to ask something. But tell us about her personality whilst people are doing that.
One of her great interests was fashion, and she writes back to her mother about what sort of dresses she's bought and so on. And yet the other side of her is has great sort of concern about what should she wear on excavations. And so she adopts sort of writing as the daughter of the village squire, she adopts this persona. So there's quite an interesting sort of double side. Her father being an MP, a member of parliament, she penned a number of songs that would be sung in his constituency during election time, which are quite fun. I won't sing them for you now, but she does actually include the music, what her father would have made of them.
And she never married?
She never married. She, I think, fell in love with one person who was married, and she said, I can't marry him. And she just continued in her archaeological love.
Remarkable. Well, who would like to ask a question to our speaker? We have a question in chat saying, what's the location of your background picture? Well, that's a start, I suppose.
It's the Saronic Gulf. So it's just where I've been doing some field work and saves me having to tidy my background.
I see. Well, could you expand a little bit of all sorts of ways we could approach this, but perhaps her relationship with Jane Harrison, also struck by parallels with Jane Harrison supporting Lamb, and of course Jane Harrison supporting the early generation of women archaeologists, such as Margaret Hasluck, of course, who was the one about whom there was such a fuss, the first one that was imposed upon the school in the view of some of its more reactionary trustees. But of course, some time passed between Margaret Hasluck and Lamb, and I was wondering whether you think by that must have died down and she had a fairly easy ride of it. Did Harrison need to use her formidable powers of persuasion, or?
No, not really. I think, of course, Cambridge from 1914 was a very different place because most men were going off to war.
Yeah.
And therefore the only people really doing part two of the tripos, the Cambridge degree is in two parts, were women. But you have William Ridgway saying, I'm not going to let you join my lectures. And there are a few people have commented and said, oh, it just shows that Ridgway didn't like women attending his classes. But actually, it's because they opposed the war. There are accounts of Winifred attending anti-war protests during the First World War.
Yes. I'm trying to remember the letters from the people of that period. I've not come across many letters from Ridgway, but I think Wallenstein was against women. I think going out to the school, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yes. I can't remember really. I've always been very sorry that I've not responded from Ridgway because he seems such an interesting man. Maybe you know of a great cache of his letters somewhere that I've missed.
I think Mary Beard has been working on them.
Oh well, she's been working on them. Then of course, who are we to go where immortals tread? So I think we'll leave that to her. But thank you for the warning. Any questions from colleagues? Don't be shy. I'm sure I know many distinguished people here. I'm sure you have lots of things you'd like to ask. What would you like to ask, Gita? I can see.
Nothing really. I just would like to hear more. It was just so fascinating. I was thinking, what a great, I mean, how great were these women, in the 1930s to travel in Turkey, on their own and go from A to B. Wow. I mean, take your hat off. Isn't it? I mean, really great admiration. But one thing actually, while I was listening to you, they must have obtained permission from the state or the local authorities for all those, no?
Yes, they did.
Uh-huh.
which is why she had somebody accompanying her to supervise what was said, or what she was looking at, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think she was very much seen as progressive, in that this was allowing sort of women to take on a role in archaeology that really they hadn't been allowed to do in Greece so much, or only in the periphery.
Excellent. Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thinking about the years again, that she became attracted to Turkey, could you remind us when she first began making expeditions, so we can set it in the context of the Republic?
It was, what have I done? With, apart from the time that she went to Izmir, which was really sort of coincidental. Hang on. It was 1934.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would have been an absolutely fascinating time, of course, because the reforms were more or less in place. There was a very strong rebuilding of the civil service to administer those reforms. So there would have been a sense of being in a rejuvenated and active country. I think that comes across from her letters, doesn't it, and her diary rather.
I mean, I've only given you a sort of flavour of those. I mean, if you want to read more, I wrote up her journey in Anatolian studies. So if you've got access to those, or without wanting to give a sort of plug, there is her biography.
Oh, no, do give a plug. You've written the full biography.
Biography of Winifred.
Oh, is that published by the Institute?
No, it's Archaeopress.
Right.
So,
right.
And again, if you're on JSTOR, I think it. I'm trying to think if it. No, I'm not sure it is online, but Archaeopress do have it, and it has been in their sale recently. So,
well, I would very much like to look at that. And what about her relations with Ramsay? Ramsay was a very interesting man, so she must have been in close contact with him just then in the 30s then, because he retired to Bournemouth at some point in the 40s.
Yes, there's not a huge link with him,
right?
Which is surprising, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think partly because she was getting very interested in prehistory with Carl Blegen and with Gordon Child. And if you actually look at her writing, she's very much picking up Gordon Child's definitions. Her emphasis, for instance, on cultures is very Child-ish.
Yeah. Child's influence was absolutely astonishing in the creation of modern archaeology. I mean, almost all modern archaeological lectures go back to Child at some point. Really quite remarkable. Even the most distinguished.
And people forget, of course, he was a student in Greece during the First World War. Because, of course, being Australian, he wasn't enlisting at that point, and and studied prehistoric pottery. Yes.
Well, not just that. He was a student of Myers. You see, when we really had an extraordinary relationship with Myers, almost like an uncle and a nephew, or well, certainly that of a mentor and an intellectual pupil. It's really quite remarkable. And I was wondering when you were talking when Myers' name was going to come up, and I wasn't surprised that gradually it became clear that because Myers, of course, also wrote the Naval Intelligence Handbooks for the Second World War.
He did indeed, and I'm just trying to think. I've just got to scroll back through this. Yep. Now, if I just really clear a second. If you look at the top of the table, who's sitting there, but it's J. Myers.
Oh, how fascinating. Can you read out the other ones?
Well, it's WL is Winifred,
Right.
Clark, Todd.
Yeah.
Miss,
Todd, of course, was a leading figure in the BSA.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And then Mrs. Todd.
Uh-huh.
Wade Geary, who's an epigrapher.
Right.
And then there's a Miss Dash, so I guess she didn't catch the name.
Mm-hmm.
And can't read I'm just reading the.
So who sat on Myers's left-hand side?
Miss Clark.
Oh, Miss
Winifred
Clark.
on his right.
Okay. Oh, fascinating. Where was that dinner held? Does it say? Jolly Susan party? No.
No, hang
Jolly
on.
dinner party.
Jolly dinner party. Morning.
Quite interesting to know where it is.
It must
Sunday
be in Oxford.
Right.
Walk and lecture at Ashmolean, preceded by call on Ashmole's. Very nice. Photographs, etc. At lecture, Mycenaean palaces, Ashmole and Frank. Can't read it. Anyway, there we.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating because you see, I always wonder what kind of role Myers has in the creation of the British Institute. I mean, clearly Garstang was the first director, but I'm trying to remember who it was who actually was the instigator, whether it was Myers or there might be people. Do you happen to remember? Maybe Winifred was one of the group of people who wanted an institute to be founded.
There wasn't. You see, before the Second World War, there was talk of an institute in Cyprus, and that didn't get anywhere.
Right. Didn't know about that.
And of course, the original idea for the British School at Athens was that it was going to be based in Izmir, and that didn't get anywhere because people said we want it where the German Institute. So I don't recall anything in her diaries about it before the Second World War, but there's material in the BBC archives, so clearly while she was the latter stages of the war, she was still looking.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So so they must have, so Garstang, who was a friend of course, must have brought her in, and it's astonishing that she was there so long that she actually got caught up in the Dvorak affair.
Yes.
I mean, that
was scandalized by it.
She was
scandalized by it.
What was her view on it?
No, she was very suspicious of it.
Well, my opinion has always been that the artifacts didn't exist, that he just made them up and just extracts attention to himself. And of course, beware of what you make up because it might bite you. Do you have the same impression?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is the received view.
Right. Oh, please do then.
Did she ever? Does she ever mention Geoffrey Lewis? Of course, Geoffrey Lewis in the 1940s during the war was in Egypt.
I don't think so, but I think he comes up with. I'm just seeing if I. No, is the answer.
He would be younger than her, but they may just have crossed.
Might be in Wace's papers. Yeah.
Just wonder.
Yeah, because I also wondered, of course, Andrew Mango was the Turkish language, of course, came in as the Turkish language specialist in the BBC. And Andrew Mango arrived in Britain during the war. So it's not impossible that their paths crossed, although Andrew was, of course, studying at the time in SOAS. But of course, now Andrew's passed away, so we can't ask him.
No, but there might be something in the BBC archives. So that
Yes. Yes, that's absolutely right. And how does posterity interpret her contribution to archaeology? I mean, is she regarded as being, obviously she was an amateur, does that count against her? Is her work nevertheless a major
No,
contribution?
it was quite interesting. When we launched the book, Colin Renfrew very kindly sort of gave a little sort of introductory speech, and he'd started in Cambridge, I think the year after she died, and he said she's a big influence, and her volume on Thermi influenced the way he approached prehistory, and was a model for philocopy and so on. So, you know, I think that's quite a good endorsement.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent endorsement. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, David. That was really fantastic. I have to ask you, because she's my special interest, do we know if she met Gertrude Bell?
That's a really surprising answer to this is no, I don't think so. And I'm just going to quickly look in the index just so that I'm not misleading you.
I can't find that she did in her diaries.
No, I think I looked and looked and looked, and it's the sort of no is the answer.
Well,
there's nothing in her diaries, which is really surprising.
The other one I wondered, does she mention at all Darina Clifton? Darina, no. Who I think also was part of setting up that Halkevi.
Right. The notes in the BBC archive are very limited, I think. So, but my recollection is the answer is no.
Thank you.
And do any records remain as to her qualities as an honorary secretary at the BIA? You see, what's at the back of my mind is it's a long time since I've read the accounts of the history of the BIA, but I don't remember her being particularly featured. I'm wondering if this is a classic case of the occlusion of women. What do you think? Maybe I'm wrong.
I feel credit hasn't been given to her.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite clear from the comments in the BBC archives and her diaries. She was working tirelessly, and I think probably gave the credit to other people.
Yeah, yeah. Because I worked for the British School, as you probably know, and the kind of the oral history of it goes Garstang, goes Seaton, Garstang, Seaton, Lloyd, and so on.
Yes.
And so presumably she knew Seaton Lloyd. I mean, they presumably.
Yes, she did. Yeah.
Yeah. But why Lamb wasn't there in the mix? Goodness only knows.
But I found this with other institutional histories that that do tend to get overlooked in the way that the account is presented. Yeah.
No. Yeah, because the context is different between the British School at Athens, which deliberately excluded women as much as they could. And by the time you get to the BIA, we're talking about 50 years later. And so it comes.
I mean, she was on the council of the BSA, and therefore I think was seen as someone who knows how an institution works.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's logical. Yeah. Yeah. It meant that she could carry on with the links between the two, because the British School at Rome, of course, and the British School at Athens were administered from the same office in London. And the BIA presumably came in after that arrangement had broken down during the war. Yeah. Any more questions for our speaker? Well, in that case, I think we just have to say thank you very much for an absolutely delightful presentation, and one that makes us think that really gives us a kind of a pleasant beginning to the festive season. I think that's the best way of we're describing it. And so we're very, very grateful to you.
Well,
thank you.
And thank you very much to Craig for organising this talk. And we will now all go off, I'm sure, and become much more sensitised to Lamb's contribution, which is exactly as it should be.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much indeed.
And we will read the book.
Right.
Indeed,
Thank you.
indeed.
Thank
So,
you.
thank you very much, and a very good evening to everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.